All right, so here we go. Yeah, so my project is titled Open Source Economy. And basically the idea, it says right here, is the idea is to explore decentralized payment ecosystems for open source technology and culture. And the idea is to use not-for-loss license and try to find incentives for transparent and consensual participation. And so as I've been talking about this with the people in the class more recently, I'm kind of realizing that maybe this should actually be called like the not-for-loss license. Maybe that should be the title of the project. But either way, that's what we'll be talking about. And so the question of why is, you want to help. The idea is to help solve the problem of funding projects within the open source ecosystem. So, for example, you have this article here that some of you might have seen. World's email encryption software relies on one guy who's going broke. And so it's a story about the author of PGP, right here, Warner Koch. And so the story here is that he's created this extremely useful software, PGP, that people use all around the world. Journalists and things. It's definitely, there's no question that there's value to the software. There's no question that there's use to it. But the question is, how do you sustain that development process, even if it's only one person, as you have here? Essentially, I think he was employing some people before, but then he had to lay those employees off. So that's really what this is about. And so in that case, you ended up with a happy story in the end, because I think it was the Linux Kernel Foundation. They ended up stepping in and funding his project basically after the article was published. But so the question is, what about these other cases that you have out there in the open source ecosystem, all these projects out there? And so a couple of the other things I was thinking about was, this idea of, okay, well, maybe it could also strengthen the open source ecosystem. You could have more diversity, more quality. These projects could be more sustainable. This idea of creating a virtuous circle of growth, basically, is something else I kind of had in mind. The idea here is to simplify transitions to profitability from nonprofit, and to reward the people who are out there who are creating the tools that enable people to do this. And again, accelerating human progress, another fine ideal. And the idea there is that, maybe if we could reduce the barriers to knowledge and tools that open source culture provides us and open source technology provides us, then that would be an obvious win if something like this could work. So the idea with this project is just to explore what can we do here? What might blockchain tech enable us to do? And so some of the challenges that I saw when I was thinking about this were, we need aligned incentives for participation, otherwise there's not going to be an economy of this kind. So that includes individuals and companies. You need attractive reasons for them to get started. You need simple ways. Eventually you're going to need apps and good tools that'll make this sort of ecosystem work. It'd be nice if we could automate these payments, and maybe we could make it based on the profitability of the projects that are out there and the tools, the usage of the tools that's actually out there, and also people's subjective evaluation of which of these tools are actually beneficial to them. And another thing I was thinking about is designing a system for distributing the funds. If this thing was to actually take off, you need to bootstrap. So you need to find early adopters. So when I was thinking about early adopters, I was thinking that probably if something like this was to work, it would probably be like the radicals in the open source system who are already there, who already care about these tools, who are already interested in investing in the process. They would probably be the ones that would see something like this and say, that's a good idea. Let's get started with this. Let's adopt it. It's a little bit difficult at first, but let's go ahead and try. I think that's what would happen. Yeah, and if you want to get adoption at large useful scales, you need corporate involvement, and so you need to have advocacy for those companies like Google or Firefox or something like this to be involved. So some of the ideas that I have for this are this idea of this not-for-loss license, which I'll explain in a moment. Voluntary and transparent participation, so you're not forcing people into it. It's completely consensual. You decide whether to use a tool or not. It's your choice. Another idea I have, so this isn't really part of this project, but it's something that I think would come into play, would be this idea of open reputations, basically, to incentivize people's behavior to be honest and accountable. Also, there's going to be identity systems. Again, that's not part of this project, but something I think is definitely on the forefront that's going to be coming out. And the idea there is that you could trust either individuals that you know, or you could join into communities where identities are verified. Maybe something like that would come up. Something else that you can do with, if you're going to have an open ecosystem of funding, you can, so I started thinking about the different actors that might be participating. So the cases I was thinking about were users, developers, students, professionals, and investors. So those are some of the use cases that I'm thinking about. The most obvious case are the open source users and developers. That's the simplest one, so that's the one that I'll be talking about most here. And something that can make that could enable those automatic and transparent payments is the Ethereum platform and the smart contracts that they provide. And so some of the use cases that I'm thinking about. So again, the open source developer and the professional user. Perhaps a Creative Commons author and someone who's enthusiastic about their work. You could have a distributed organization, autonomous organization company, and foreign investors maybe, that could also be part of the economy. I mean, you don't really see something like that right now so much, I don't think, but something that you might be able to have maybe. Maybe you could have like a DAO, sort of Google or something, developing open source tech, and they could be releasing the software under this license, and maybe they could form agreements with foreign investors, and maybe use the Ethereum platform or something like this. Another case that you could have, getting kind of far out here, but I think it's pretty interesting. You could have mentorship and student relationships under similar models. So that's not necessarily a not lost license per se, but it's something that I've been thinking about and kind of investigating in this direction. And then on kind of the far out fringe, you have this idea of maybe you could have an open architects. So they're creating these designs that could potentially be open source architecture designs, and that basically that is an example of a cultural product that could be open. And then what you might have is you might have a DAO construction firm that takes those designs, builds houses or buildings out there in the world, internationally, and maybe it could be funding the designer of architecture design. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. And the main case study that I looked at was open source developers and professional users. That's kind of the easiest and most direct case here. And so I was just thinking about, the incentives about what does the open source developer want? They want to make a difference in the world. They want to have widespread use. They want to have minimal barriers, people adopting it. There's this idea of this culture of understanding and improvement in open source, which I think is one of the key things. So you have unrestricted learning and modification. I think that's really the key to open source. And of course, they want to be paid for their efforts, and it'd be nice if that could be in proportion to how useful they actually are to people. And then you think about the professional software user. They want simple, secure software that meets their needs. They want to be assured of the source, assured it's authentic. They want to have a voice in the future development of that software, and they want to support those individuals and organizations that are empowering them to be profitable themselves and supporting them. And so the tools that I came up with that might work in this economy are basically these 5 things that you see here. And so it's really a series of layers from top to bottom, and they're kind of different. So the first one that you have is the not for loss license. And the idea here is basically that it would grant unlimited commercial, nonprofit, and personal use to any organization or individual that agrees to share a small amount, about 1%, or that's just a number I throw out there, it could be less, could be 0.1%. I don't know what the right number is, but something like that. Here I say over a subscription period with parts of the open ecosystem that they value. So actually, as I've been thinking about this project, I actually kind of shifted the way that I'm thinking about it. I'm shifting away from this subscription idea towards something of a membership model, basically. So the idea of this economy is that it'd be something that you join, and that you could be said to be a member in good standing. So here's the actual not-for-loss license. And it's pretty simple. It's plain English, human understandable. And it pretty much says what I just said. It grants unlimited commercial, nonprofit, personal use to any organization or individual. It basically share a small amount, about 1%, with the parts of the open ecosystem that they value, and that's really the key thing. And in proportion to their benefit and use. So again, that's a subjective decision. That's up to them to decide. And the idea is that by doing so, they become members of the ecosystem, and they can be said to be in good standing. So this isn't something that's meant to be like legally enforced or legally binding. It doesn't use smart contracts exactly to hold people to this. The idea is that this would be more of a social component, social enforcement, where people are watching what other members of the open economy are doing, and would be watching out for each other, basically. And so that's the first thing. So the not for loss license is something that is the idea is that it's a license that maybe you could layer on to existing licenses. So that might be license or GPL license or something like this. Maybe you could just throw a not for loss license on there, layered in some way. Maybe need to be tweaked to be compatible or something like this. But that's the basic idea. So it's kind of similar to what you see with existing dual license products like MySQL, where there's an open license and a commercial license, or the Qt library, where again you have commercial and open source licenses. So the idea here is actually to make the whole ecosystem simpler by having this single license that you could use in all these cases and make a lot simpler for people to think about actually. And the reason why it's simpler is because you no longer have to think about, well, am I going to be using this tool commercially, or is it going to be a nonprofit? If I use it commercially, and am I going to be able to make back the investment that I put in? So the idea here is that this is something that would scale, whether you're making no profit at all, whether you're losing money, or whether you're starting to make money. The idea with this not-for-loss license is that it's extremely low risk to you, and it's extremely simple to use, basically. Because if you don't make money, there's no problem. And if you do, then you can just join the economy. If you're already in it, then other pieces of software under this license would be extremely simple to use. And I think there would be a network effect there. The second component here, so this is a different layer. This is the smart contract layer. So you have the legal layer, and so the idea of the public accounts is that it's a place where individuals and organizations can receive their funds in a public way and then redirect them to other recipients. It could be other public accounts, it could be private accounts. And but the idea is that smart contracts let you be very flexible about this, and you make it very transparent and auditable. And then a couple of these other ones here. So these two are, they sound a little bit esoteric, but it's pretty simple. So the valuation measure, the idea is it's just a way to allocate the donations that you're going to be contributing back into the open source economy. So basically, it's another contract component, and it's a subcomponent of the public account, and it models the degree to which they value others, and it distributes the funds accordingly. And the transaction middleware, so this is actually something I've been thinking about. It's not implemented in the small system that I have right now, but the idea is that basically you could swap in and out other components. So right now I have a valuation measure, or value distribution, and a donation contract, and those are kind of the two middleware components. But the idea is that you can have other components that might be useful. I probably haven't thought of everything that you would need for this, and other people will imagine other things. And so that's what you can have. And then the donation contract is the last submodule for the public account. And that basically just makes it really easy for you to share your incoming resources with other participants in the economy. And I mentioned identity and reputation. Also, registries and rating agencies would also be important, but they're not in the scope.
2 more minutes.
All right, yeah. And I have a long list of incentives that you might have for users, developers, for students, professionals, investors, all these things. You can see all those. It's on the public GitHub repo. And the other thing you can take a look at, besides the license itself, is the system of contracts. And so this contains all the contracts right here. It's open source economy.solidity.
Zoom in on that a little.
Yeah, it's a Solidity contract. And it includes the value distribution. It has a nice little example here of how you use it. And what it does basically manages keys and values, and it lets you allocate your donations, basically. And then the second contract that I have down here is a donation service contract. And this is how you use it right here. And it's, again, Solidity. And once you donate to multiple recipients, according to your choices, basically, it's kind of a service contract. So it doesn't really have any state. It just processes these donation weights. So the way that you donate is you say donate, and you give it the address of your donation weight contract. It takes that and it distributes accordingly, basically. And then third, you have the public account, which includes those as submodules, and it lets you process those funds in accordance with the not-for-loss license. And you can see right here, you have the public account and the submodules. And when you send a payment to it, there's a payment event, the donation service donates the value, and it sends the rest of the value to the account donor. And that's basically how it works. And so the focus of this project was really just to model these underlying contracts in this new language that's just come out. And I don't really have a fancy application to show, but it does compile and it does run in the Mix IDE. Yeah, there we go. So there you go. This is actually an example of one case of just setting up and running these contracts. Where you see the public account is created, and you see it setting donation weights. I have the index.html file. So basically, the story here is that the APIs on Ethereum are changing a lot, and in particular, the transact or send transaction method was changing a lot as of last week. So I wasn't really able to spend the time to get that working in this last week, actually. But the idea is that you can actually call these methods and distribute the donation weights according to what you want, and then once these APIs are settled on the Web3 for Ethereum, then you'll be able to send transactions to this public account contract that you see, and it should unfold according to plan is the idea. And so, you know, they were just talking about with the Ethereum project, they're just talking about their release schedule, and that's going to be over the next year, I guess, probably starting in March or so. And they're going to have these 4 different layers. They're calling it like Frontier and Homestead and Metropolis and Serenity are the 4 different phases that we're planning over this year. And the idea with the Frontier phase is that it's going to be, you know, this really nuts and bolts, you know, down in the technology, at the command line, running these contracts. There's not a lot of graphical user interface on top. But the idea is that they're going to release the Genesis block and that this stuff is going to get started. And so that's what I was very excited about trying to do with this project. And that's what I have.
One question. You talked about donation rates at 0.1% or 1%, but I guess you have not really thought deeper that how would somebody make the donation rate allocation? How much would you charge? Is there any thinking on that?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So the question is about the donation weights. You know, should it be 0.1% or 1%? And then also, how does the actual donation weighting work? So I think there needs to be more modeling done on the mathematics of does this actually work out? Is this really the right value? I haven't done those mathematical models really. I think it needs to be done. The other thing is the software component, because that's huge too. Is for something like this to actually work, you're going to need software tools that allow you to allocate these resources relatively easy for you. So probably it'd be something that integrates with their operating system or something like this. Or it could be something, if you're a developer, that integrates with the packages that you deploy. So if you look at Eris Industries, I think Casey Coleman, he was working on the Ethereum package manager last year. And actually, he had something built into that where it's kind of like NPM. But the idea was that it would scan your dependencies or your package that you're deploying, and it would actually either distribute back to EPM in part, and also to the other packages that you had. So something like, I think even though this idea sounds kind of out there, I think the idea is really out there in the air right now. People are talking about it, and I know the Ethereum team is too. Yeah.